Unaware his pregnant wife was a trillionaire's daughter about to award him $50 billion contract, he pushed her face into their son's birthday cake, while guests sat in silence as his mistress filmed it. Laughing unaware, his wife's father was watching. What he did will make you cry, and what his wife did change him forever. The $50 billion contract was already signed. Her father, a man so wealthy the word billionaire didn't reach him, a trillionaire in the truest sense, had spent months watching the man his daughter married, watching how he carried himself, watching how he spoke to people smaller than him, watching whether the man who shared a bed with his only child, his pregnant daughter, deserved the future he was prepared to hand him. And he had decided yes. The contract, $50 billion, enough to make his son-in-law one of the most powerful businessmen in America overnight, was ready to be awarded. He would surprise them at the birthday party, walk in, embrace his daughter, shake the man's hand, and change his life forever. But he was unaware, completely unaware, of what he was about to walk into. So was everyone else in that house. The guests were seated. Their son's cake, white, 5 candles, the boy's name written in blue, sat at the center of the table. His daughter stood beside it, pregnant, radiant, adjusting the banner with careful hands, laughing softly at something a guest had said. And across the room, pressed near the wall with her phone already up, was a woman no one recognized. His mistress. She had come not to celebrate, but to document. Not to witness joy, but to engineer humiliation. She had spent 2 months convincing him that his wife was weak, that a public moment of dominance would remind the room who held power in that marriage. And he believed her. He walked in from the hallway, crossed the room without a word, and pushed her face into their son's birthday cake. His pregnant wife's face, while the entire room of guests sat in silence. The kind of silence that happens when something is so wrong that the body forgets to react. His mistress filmed it, laughing, tilting the phone, savoring it. Unaware his wife's father was watching, already standing inside the front door, the contract folder still under his arm, his face doing something no one in that room had ever seen a powerful man's face do. It collapsed, not into anger, not yet, into something older, into grief. What he did next will make you cry. And what his wife did after she lifted her face from that cake, frosting on her cheek, hands steady on her belly, and looked her husband directly in the eye, changed him forever. But the real question, the one this story will force you to answer for yourself, is this. Can a man who breaks something that precious ever truly be fixed? Or does some damage only teach? It never heals. Dear viewers, this story will take you through betrayal, hidden identity, fatherly love, and the kind of quiet dignity that survives public humiliation. By the end, you will understand what it truly means to see someone, and what you lose the moment you stop. Drop in the comments. What lesson hit you hardest? And what would you have done if you were in her position? Subscribe now, because stories this powerful deserve to find you every week. The morning of their son's 5th birthday, Nathaniel Grayson woke up beside a woman he thought he knew completely. He was wrong, but he wouldn't find that out until the cake was already ruined, and by then, everything else would be ruined too. Elaine Grayson was already awake when the sun came through the curtains. She lay still for a moment, one hand resting on the soft swell of her belly, where their second child moved in slow, sleepy circles. And she watched the ceiling the way a person watches something they are preparing to let go of. Her eyes were calm, but her jaw was tight in the way it always got when she was deciding something quietly. A habit her father had always called her most dangerous quality. Elaine, he used to say, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of his Manhattan office with the city spread beneath them like a kingdom. The most powerful thing you will ever do is nothing. Wait, watch. Let people show you who they are before you show them who you are. She had listened to that lesson for 26 years. She was still listening to it now. She rose carefully, pulling her robe around her shoulders, and padded quietly toward the kitchen. Past the birthday banner their son Trevor had helped her tape to the wall the evening before. Past the stack of wrapped gifts by the door. Past the photograph on the hallway wall that she had stopped looking at directly because it hurt in a way she hadn't yet named. The photograph was from their wedding day. Nathaniel's hand on her waist, her face turned up toward his, both of them laughing at something the photographer had said. She had been so certain then. In the kitchen, she began making coffee, a ritual that had once been theirs together, but had become hers alone somewhere in the past 18 months. She didn't think about when exactly that shift had happened. She had learned not to pull at those threads too early in the morning. What she thought about instead was her father. Raymond Whitfield had called her 3 days ago, not on the number Nathaniel knew about, on the private line she kept tucked in the inner pocket of her coat like a secret she was not yet ready to surrender. His voice had been warm and careful, the way it always was when he was managing something large. "I'll be there Saturday," he had said, "for the boy's birthday, and for something else." She had not asked what the something else was. She already knew her father well enough to understand that when he said something else, he meant something that would change the room permanently. What she did not know, could not have known, was exactly how permanently the room was about to change, or who else was planning to be in it. Nathaniel came downstairs at 8:15, already dressed, already distracted, his phone face down on the counter in the way it had been face down for 7 months. Always face down, always angled slightly away, always retrieved with a body that moved just a fraction too quickly. Elaine noticed. She had been noticing for months, but she said nothing, because her father's voice lived in her chest like a compass. "Wait. Watch. Let people show you who they are." "Trevor up?" Nathaniel asked, pouring his own coffee without looking at her. "Still sleeping," she said. "Party starts at 2. His cousins will be here by 1:30. He nodded. And then, almost as an afterthought, the kind that wasn't an afterthought at all, he said, "I invited a colleague. Hope that's okay." Elaine set her mug down slowly. "A colleague. From work. Just someone I've been collaborating with. I didn't think it would be a big deal." He still wasn't looking at her. Elaine turned back to the window above the sink, where the backyard was still quiet, the birthday decorations she had hung from the oak tree swaying gently in the morning breeze. "Of course," she said. "The more the merrier." But her hand, hidden beneath the counter, pressed flat against her belly. Steady, protective. The way a person braces themselves when they feel something coming that they cannot stop and are not yet ready to name. Upstairs, Trevor's small feet hit the floor. His voice came cascading down the staircase. "Mommy, is it my birthday? Is it today?" Bright and clean and completely unaware of what his birthday morning was already carrying. Elaine smiled, and it was real. Because the child's joy was the one thing in this house that still was. But downstairs, Nathaniel's phone had already lit up. Face down on the counter, buzzing once, twice, 3 times. He picked it up faster than any innocent man should have needed to. By 1 o'clock, the house was full of people who had no idea they were about to witness something they would never stop talking about. Trevor ran between the legs of arriving guests like a small, joyful storm, his birthday crown slightly tilted, his laughter bouncing off every wall. Elaine had made sure everything was perfect. The blue and white balloons, the homemade lasagna that Nathaniel's mother had requested specifically, the birthday cake, 3 tiers, white frosting, blue trim, Trevor's name written in careful cursive across the top, sitting at the center of the dining table like the most innocent thing in the room. Which, as it turned out, it was. Elaine moved through the gathering the way she always did, graceful, unhurried, making every guest feel like the most important person there. Nathaniel's sister, Brenda, caught her arm near the kitchen doorway and squeezed it warmly. "You look beautiful," Brenda said, eyes dropping briefly to Elaine's belly. "Both of you." "Thank you," Elaine said, and meant it. Brenda was the one person in Nathaniel's family who had always looked at her with uncomplicated warmth. No questions about where she came from, no probing about her family's money, no curiosity about why a woman as composed as Elaine had chosen a man as ordinary as her brother. Not that Brenda would have understood the answer. The answer was simple, and it lived in a memory Elaine rarely let herself revisit. A rainy Tuesday, 4 years ago, when Nathaniel hadn't known she was watching. She had been sitting in a coffee shop across from the small construction firm he was trying to build from nothing. And she had watched him spend 40 minutes helping an elderly man whose car had broken down in the rain. He hadn't known her then, hadn't known her name, had nothing to gain, That was the man she had married. She still believed that man existed somewhere inside the one currently checking his phone by the back door. At 1:47, the door opened, and the room shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that anyone could have pointed to and named. But Elaine felt it, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, a subtle wrongness entering a space that had been, until that second, only complicated. Her name was Vanessa Cole. She walked in wearing a yellow dress that was precisely 2 degrees too bright for a child's birthday party. The kind of choice that wasn't accidental, that announced itself. That said, I want to be looked at in a room where someone else was supposed to be the center. She was carrying a small gift bag that she handed to Trevor with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The smile of a woman performing warmth rather than feeling it. Trevor accepted the bag with a polite "thank you" and immediately ran back toward his cousins, already forgetting her. Children, Elaine had always believed, were the most honest judges of character. Nathaniel crossed the room to Vanessa with 3 steps that were just slightly too quick. The steps of a man trying to look casual while moving with purpose. He said something low near her ear. She laughed, and the laugh, and small, private, angled away from the room, landed on Elaine's chest like a stone dropped from a height. Elaine didn't look away. She watched them the way her father had taught her, calmly, completely. And then she turned back to her guests, refilled a glass, laughed at a joke Nathaniel's uncle made about getting old, and gave nothing away. But in the kitchen, alone for exactly 45 seconds while she retrieved the extra napkins, she gripped the counter edge with both hands, closed her eyes and breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The breathing technique her therapist had taught her for moments when the truth became too heavy to carry casually. She had known about Vanessa for 11 weeks. She had said nothing, because her father's voice lived in her ribcage like a second heartbeat. Wait. Watch. Let people show you who they are. She had been waiting. She had been watching. She just hadn't known how loudly they were about to show her. Outside, 2 streets away, a black SUV moved quietly through the residential road. Tinted windows, no plates visible from the front. A small American flag pin on the driver's lapel that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what it meant. Raymond Whitfield checked his watch. He was early. He had always believed that a man who arrived early saw the truth of a place before it had time to prepare itself. In his lap sat a manila folder, thick, sealed, embossed with the logo of Whitfield Global Industries. Inside it, a contract worth $50 billion. He had spent 3 months deciding that Nathaniel Grayson deserved it. He would spend the next 3 hours learning how catastrophically wrong he had been. But Raymond Whitfield was a man who, once he had seen something, never looked away. And what he was about to see, what his daughter had been carrying alone for 11 weeks, would not make him angry. Not at first. First, it would break him. And a broken Raymond Whitfield, every person who had ever sat across from him in a boardroom knew, was far more dangerous than an angry one. His driver turned onto Elaine Street. Inside the house, Vanessa Cole set her phone on the windowsill and quietly opened the camera. The candles were lit at 2:47. 13 people stood around the dining table. Adults arranged in the loose, comfortable way of people who believed the afternoon's only agenda was cake and celebration. Trevor stood at the head of the table on a small step stool Elaine had painted blue the previous weekend, his birthday crown now perfectly straight because Brenda had fixed it for him 5 minutes earlier. His face in the candlelight was the face of a child who had not yet learned that the world could be ugly, open, expectant, luminous. Elaine stood to his left, one hand resting on the table's edge for balance, her belly round beneath her dress, her smile directed entirely at her son. She had decided in the kitchen 11 minutes earlier that she would give this moment to Trevor completely. Or whatever was coming, and she could feel it, coming the way you feel weather before it arrives, it would not take this from her son. Not these 40 seconds of candlelight and singing. Not this. So she sang, fully, warmly, and for 40 seconds, nothing else existed. What she didn't see, because her eyes were on Trevor, was the front door opening silently behind the gathered guests. What she didn't see was the tall man in the dark coat stepping inside, moving with the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to announce himself to be felt in a room. Raymond Whitfield, her father, his silver hair close cut, his eyes scanning the room in the practiced way of a man who had spent 50 years reading spaces before speaking in them. He saw his daughter first, and the expression that crossed his face, private, fierce, and overwhelming, was the expression of a man looking at the most important thing he had ever built, and knowing in the marrow of his bones that she was extraordinary. Then he saw the man beside the window, Nathaniel, his son-in-law, the man he had come to honor. Standing slightly apart from the group, phone in hand, tilted toward the woman in the yellow dress beside him. Vanessa, her own phone already raised, already recording, already wearing a smile that Raymond Whitfield identified and cataloged in under 3 seconds. He had seen that smile before, in boardrooms, on the faces of people who were about to do something they believed they could get away with. His hand tightened on the manila folder, but he didn't move because his daughter was still singing. And Raymond Whitfield would not interrupt his daughter's voice for anything. The song ended. Trevor squeezed his eyes shut, made his wish with the seriousness of a philosopher, and blew. The room erupted. Applause, laughter, the warm collective exhale of people who had, for one brief moment, all wanted the same thing at the same time. And then Nathaniel moved. Later, those who were in that room would struggle to explain exactly what they saw. Not because it happened too fast, but because it happened too deliberately. Because there was nothing accidental about it. Nothing impulsive. He crossed the room with intention, with a jaw set hard, with eyes that had already decided something. And he reached his pregnant wife from behind, his hand finding the back of her head. And he pushed. Hard. Elaine's face drove into the birthday cake, the white frosting, the blue trim. Trevor's name. The room went silent so completely that the sound of the candles, 3 that hadn't fully extinguished, was audible. Nobody moved. Not Brenda, whose hand flew to her mouth. Not Nathaniel's uncle, who took one step forward and then stopped as though his body couldn't complete the decision. Not the children at the far end of the table, who went very still in the way children go still when the adult world suddenly reveals something they don't have language for yet. Trevor, still on his step stool, stared at his mother. His birthday crown slipped sideways. In the corner, Vanessa filmed it, laughing, low and satisfied and certain. The phone steady in her hand, zoomed in, deliberate. And the laugh of a woman who believed she was watching a victory. Elaine straightened slowly. She did not gasp. She did not cry. She lifted her face from the ruined cake, frosting on her cheek, on her chin, pressed into her eyelashes. And she stood upright with one hand moving immediately, instinctively, to her belly. The child inside her moved. Once, strong, as though it too was deciding something. Elaine opened her eyes, and Raymond Whitfield, standing at the back of the room where no one had yet noticed him, watched his daughter's face, and felt something collapse inside his chest that he knew, with absolute certainty, would never fully reconstruct itself. His hand released the manila folder. It fell, and the $50 billion inside it landed on the floor of the hallway without a sound. Because some things, when they fall, don't make the noise you expect. They just disappear. Raymond Whitfield bent down and picked up the folder. He did it slowly, deliberately, the way a man picks up something he has decided will never reach its intended destination. He straightened, tucked it back under his arm, and stood in the hallway for exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds in which he looked at the room full of frozen people, at his daughter standing at the head of the ruined table with cake on her face and one hand on her unborn child, at the man who had just done what no man in Raymond's 50 years of watching the world had ever done in front of him. And then Raymond Whitfield did something that frightened every person who later heard about it far more than shouting would have. He smiled, not warmly, not with humor. The smile of a man who has just received at great personal cost a piece of information he needed, and who already knows exactly what he's going to do with it. He turned, walked back into the hallway, pulled out his phone. He made the first call in 12 seconds. "It's me," he said when the line connected. "Pull the Grayson file, everything, contracts, credit lines, the refinancing on the commercial property on Ellison Avenue. All of it. Hold every pending approval." A pause. "No, don't ask me why. Just hold it." He ended the call, dialed again immediately. Marcus, he caught himself. Old habit, reset. Daniel, I need you to contact the Hargrove Group and let them know the recommendation I made last month regarding Grayson Construction is being withdrawn. Effective today, cite a character assessment. Another pause, longer this time. Because I assessed his character myself. 20 minutes ago, that's why. He ended that call too, stood in the hallway, breathed once, made the third call. The quietest one. The one where his voice dropped to something that wasn't anger and wasn't grief, but was the precise, terrible combination of both. Get my lawyers on the phone and get my daughter's name removed from every joint asset she shares with Nathaniel Grayson before the close of business Monday. I don't care what it takes. I care that it's done. He put the phone in his pocket, and then he walked into the kitchen. Not into the dining room where Nathaniel was still standing in the ruins of what he had done, not toward the mistress who had, by now, lowered her phone and begun to understand from the temperature of the room that something had shifted catastrophically, but into the kitchen, where Elaine had gone, where Elaine always went when she needed four walls and quiet. She was standing at the sink, running cold water over a dish towel, pressing it to her face, methodical, unhurried, removing the frosting from her cheek, her chin, the corner of her eye. Her back was straight. Her breathing was even. The hand not holding the towel was flat on the counter, steady and deliberate. Raymond stood in the kitchen doorway and watched his daughter clean her own face. And something happened inside his chest that he had no name for and would never try to find one. Because some feelings he had learned are not meant to be named. They are meant to be carried into action. Elaine, he said. She turned. And when she saw him, when her eyes found her father standing in her kitchen doorway on her son's birthday, with his coat still on and his jaw set in the way she had seen it set exactly twice before in her life, both times preceding events that had permanently rearranged the lives of everyone involved, something in her face finally, quietly, moved. Not collapsed, not crumbled. Moved. The way a glacier moves. Slowly, massively, unstoppably. Her chin lifted a fraction. Her eyes filled. Not spilled, filled. And she said one word. Daddy? Raymond Whitfield crossed his kitchen in 4 steps and put his arms around his pregnant daughter with the careful, enormous tenderness of a man holding something irreplaceable. His hand, the same hand that had just dismantled a man's financial future in 3 phone calls, cradled the back of her head, where Nathaniel's hand had just been. I saw, Raymond said quietly, into her hair. I saw everything. Elaine pressed her face into her father's coat, and for the first time in 11 weeks, 11 weeks of knowing, of waiting, of carrying the weight of what she knew in silence, she let herself be held. She didn't sob, didn't shake. She simply exhaled. Long, slow, complete. The breath of a woman releasing something she had been holding underwater. In the dining room, the silence had finally broken into whispers. Brenda was asking Nathaniel something in a voice pulled tight with fury. Nathaniel's uncle had moved his chair back from the table. The body language of a man creating distance from a disaster. The children had been quietly shepherded to the living room by one of the cousins, who understood, even at 17, that the adults needed the room. Vanessa stood near the window. Her phone was in her purse now. The laughing had stopped. Because the man she had not recognized when he walked past her, the tall man in the dark coat who had gone into the kitchen without speaking to anyone, had been identified by one of the guests. Nathaniel's uncle, whose face had gone the color of old paper, had leaned across the table and said 4 words in a whisper that silenced every conversation in the room instantly. That's Raymond Whitfield. Here. Nobody spoke after that, because in the world of American business and generational wealth, Raymond Whitfield's name did not require explanation. It required silence. The kind of silence you gave a force of nature, not out of fear exactly, but out of the instinct that told you, in the presence of something that large, the correct response was stillness. Vanessa's hand, inside her purse, found her phone, and she began quietly and with increasing urgency to delete the video. But what Vanessa did not know, what she could not have known, was that Raymond Whitfield's second call had not only been to the Hargrove Group, it had been to a number she would have recognized had she heard it dialed, her own employer's number. Because Raymond Whitfield, in 50 years of building an empire, had learned one thing above all others, that the people who film the suffering of others always believe they are safe behind the camera. And they are never safe. They are simply not yet aware of how unsafe they are. In the kitchen, Elaine pulled back from her father's embrace, wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, clean, decisive, straightened her spine, and then she said something that made Raymond Whitfield, in all his power and fury and grief, look at his daughter with an expression that was entirely new, something that lived beyond pride, beyond love, in the territory of pure, humbled awe. She said, "Don't destroy him, Daddy, not yet. I need to do something first." Raymond looked at her. "What?" he said. Elaine reached for the kitchen doorway. "I need to go back to the table," she said quietly. "Trevor's birthday isn't over." 6 months after Trevor's 5th birthday, Elaine Grayson gave birth to a girl. She named her Grace, not because it was a family name, not because it was trending or pretty or suggested by anyone in the delivery room, but because Grace was the thing that had carried Elaine through every moment she had wanted to break and hadn't. Every morning she had made coffee alone. Every night she had pressed her father's lesson into her chest like armor. Every second she had stood at that table with cake on her face and chosen dignity over destruction. Grace was not just a name, it was a testimony. Raymond Whitfield was in the waiting room when she was born, sitting in a plastic hospital chair that was laughably inadequate for a man of his stature, still in his dress shirt, tie loosened, reading glasses on, and pretending to read a magazine he had been holding upside down for 40 minutes. When the nurse came out and told him he had a granddaughter, he took his glasses off, pressed them to his mouth, and sat very still for a long moment. Then he said, "Is Elaine okay?" "Not." "Is she healthy?" "Not." "How much does she weigh?" "Not." "What does she look like?" "Is Elaine okay?" The nurse smiled and said yes, and Raymond Whitfield, trillionaire, empire builder, the man whose name made banks pause and governments listen, put his face in his hands and wept the way men weep when they have been frightened for a very long time and have finally been given permission to stop. Trevor, sitting beside his grandfather in an identical plastic chair with a juice box and his grandfather's phone, looked up at the sound and patted Raymond's arm with the solemn, instinctive tenderness of a child who understands comfort before he understands grief. "It's okay, Grandpa," he said. "Mommy's the strongest person in the whole world." Raymond looked at his grandson. "Yes," he said quietly. "She is." Nathaniel Grayson did not attend the birth. He had not been invited. In the 6 months between the birthday party and the delivery room, the architecture of his life had been quietly and thoroughly dismantled. Not violently, not publicly, but with the precise, unhurried efficiency of a man like Raymond Whitfield, who had spent 50 years understanding that the most permanent damage is done not with noise, but with patience. The refinancing on his commercial property was denied. The Hargrove Group partnership dissolved without explanation. On 3 other investors, men who had taken Raymond Whitfield's calls within hours of that birthday party, quietly withdrew from pending deals with Grayson Construction, citing internal restructuring, offering no further comment. Nathaniel's company did not collapse overnight. It listed, slowly, the way a ship lists when something fundamental below the waterline has been compromised. Still floating, still moving, but wrong in a way that cannot be corrected without first acknowledging the damage. He called Elaine 14 times in the first week. She answered once. "I'm not doing this for revenge," she said when he started to speak. "I'm not doing anything to you at all, Nathaniel. What is happening to you is the natural consequence of who you chose to be. I want you to understand the difference." He started to say something. She said, "Wena, Trevor loves you. I will never take that from him. But the man Trevor loves needs to be worth loving. That is the only conversation I'm willing to have with you going forward." She hung up, and Nathaniel sat in the apartment he had moved into after Elaine's lawyers, Raymond Whitfield's lawyers, as it turned out, 17 of them, had finalized the separation agreement, and he sat with the phone in his hand, in a silence that was nothing like the silence in that dining room, That silence had been other people's shock. This silence was his own. Vanessa Cole's employment was terminated 9 days after the birthday party. She never fully understood why. The official reason cited was a restructuring of her department. But the timing, she understood. And the understanding settled over her like something cold and permanent. She had deleted the video, but Raymond Whitfield's people had retrieved it from the cloud backup of a phone she had forgotten she owned. It was never made public. Raymond had decided against it, not to protect Nathaniel, but because the video contained his daughter's face in a moment of humiliation, and Raymond Whitfield would not put his daughter's pain on display for the world's consumption, regardless of the justice it might have delivered. Some things, he believed, belong only to the people who live them. The $50 billion contract was awarded 14 months later. Not to Nathaniel, to a young construction firm founded by a 29-year-old engineer from Atlanta, a man who had built his first project with borrowed tools and a crew of 4, who treated every person on his team with the same respect regardless of their title, and who, when Raymond Whitfield's people ran their character assessment, was described by everyone they interviewed, from his accountant to the woman who cleaned his office, as a man who was exactly the same person, whether or not anyone was watching. Raymond Whitfield had learned, at great personal cost, that this last quality was the only one that truly mattered. Elaine never returned to the house. She and Trevor and baby Grace moved into a brownstone 3 blocks from Raymond's Manhattan residence, not into Raymond's world of drivers and security details and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking kingdoms, but into something that was entirely and deliberately her own. A home she chose, furnished herself, painted the colors she wanted without asking anyone's opinion. She went back to work, not to Whitfield Global, but to the non-profit she had quietly co-founded 2 years earlier, providing legal and financial support to women navigating the exact situation she had just survived. She had never mentioned it to Nathaniel. He had never asked what she did with her Tuesday afternoons. He had not known his wife at all, and that, Elaine had come to understand, was not entirely his fault, and not entirely her responsibility to fix. She had spent 3 years waiting for the man she saw in the rain on that Tuesday to reappear. But the version of Nathaniel who helped strangers when no one was watching had been slowly replaced over years and choices and small surrenders to his worst instincts by the version who humiliated his pregnant wife when he thought the only person watching was someone who would applaud him for it. People, she had learned, were not static. They moved toward their best selves or away from them, and no amount of love from the outside could substitute for the will to move in the right direction from the inside. She had loved him well, but loving someone well is not the same as being able to save them. On Grace's first Christmas, Raymond came for dinner. He sat at Elaine's table, a normal table, nothing like the ones in his offices, with crayon marks on one corner from Trevor, and a slightly uneven leg that Elaine kept meaning to fix. And he ate the meal she cooked, and he listened to Trevor tell him an extremely long story about something that had happened at school involving a frog and a misunderstanding. And he laughed, genuinely, fully, without reservation. After dinner, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Raymond sat across from his daughter with 2 cups of tea between them and said the thing he had been carrying since the birthday party. "I should have been more present," he said. "All those years I was watching from a distance. I told myself I was giving you space to live your own life. But the truth is, I was watching when I should have been there. And you carried things alone that you should never have had to carry." Elaine looked at her father for a long moment. "You came," she said simply. "When it mattered, you came." Raymond nodded, looked at his tea. "I had a $50 billion contract in my hand," he said quietly. "I was going to change his life." "I know." He had no idea. "No," Elaine said. "He didn't." A silence settled between them, but it was the warm kind. It's the kind that exists between people who have survived something together and no longer need to fill every space with words. Then Elaine said, "The man who got the contract, the one from Atlanta, is he good?" Raymond looked up, and something moved in his eyes that was close to peace. "He's the real thing," he said. Elaine nodded, wrapped both hands around her mug. "Good," she said. "That's how it should be." From the hallway, on the wall between the kitchen and the living room, A new photograph had replaced the wedding picture. It was taken the day Grace came home from the hospital. Elaine in the doorway of the brownstone, Trevor pressed against her side with both arms around her waist, baby Grace wrapped in white against her chest, Raymond standing just behind them with one hand on his daughter's shoulder. All of them caught mid-laugh at something Trevor had just said. Nobody posed, nobody prepared. It was simply what they looked like when they were happy. And on the back of the photograph, in Elaine's handwriting, small, clean, certain, were 4 words she had written for no one but herself. We are still here. The moral of the story: the most dangerous thing a person can do is underestimate the one standing quietly beside them. Nathaniel Grayson had a trillionaire's daughter making his coffee every morning, carrying his children, protecting his peace. And he looked at her and saw ordinary. He looked at her and saw someone he could diminish, someone who would absorb his cruelty and ask for nothing in return. He was not wrong that she would absorb it, when he was catastrophically wrong about what would happen after. Because the people who carry the most, who wait the longest, who love the hardest, who choose dignity when destruction would be easier, are never the ones without power. They are the ones who have simply chosen, until that moment, not to use it. And when they finally do, it is not loud. It is not angry. It is simply permanent. Dear viewers, thank you for staying until the very end. This story was about more than betrayal. It was about what we miss when we stop truly seeing the people who love us. It was about the kind of strength that doesn't shout. It simply outlasts. It was about a father who arrived when it mattered, a mother who put her son's birthday candles above her own pain, and a little girl named Grace who came into the world as proof that something beautiful can grow from the hardest seasons. Drop in the comments the lesson that hit you hardest, and what you would have done differently if you were in Elaine's shoes. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe, because every week we bring you stories that remind you what truly matters.